Welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers retrial. Erik and Lyle Menendez on trial for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez, and we are on the defense's case in chief, part 9. And we're still on the first witness, who is Dr. Fackler, and he is the wound ballistics expert, and he's like the OG expert of wound ballistics, and he's also a trauma surgeon, and he's also been trained in plastic surgery, which kind of coincides with, the trauma surgery aspect, that he was repairing wounds on the battlefield with his 30 plus years in the Army and Navy combined. So that's who's on the stand right now. This, I believe, is going to be the last part of his testimony. Next, we're going to go into a bunch of argument because they're going to argue about all the different witnesses for the defense and things that they didn't get and whatever they're trying to like stop. So there's going to be arguments probably in the next episode or two, just to give you an idea of what's up. So, but letting you get back to the testimony, we are with Dr. Fackler and we're on recross. I'm sorry, redirect. I keep doing that. Redirect because we're on the defense's case, so it's direct. And but this is redirect, and we're just going to pick up where we left off. Please hit that like button and let's get started. So they went for a break in the morning of November 22nd, 1995. Now this is their after their morning break, they've come back. So, pardon me, I am doing multiple recordings today because I have a infusion, a Remicade infusion tomorrow. So I won't be able to record this in the morning, so I have to do this ahead of time, and it's late, and I got to record, and I got coffee with me, so it's going to be one of those days. All right, so the court says, okay, the jury is back. You may continue your redirect examination. Ms. Abramson says, Dr. Fackler, in examining all of the illustrations that have been marked as exhibits here reflecting failure analysis, proposed reconstruction, did you particularly note, among other things, the angles of the trajectories that purported to create the wounds in this case on those illustrations? Yes. And of the 12 different positions of each of the decedents that was illustrated in these, on how many did it appear to you, based on the medical evidence and the ballistics evidence and the scene evidence, were the angles shown potentially correct? Well, if I might suggest that there were only 11 that involved bodies. Okay. And those are the ones I concentrated on. I didn't have anything to do with ones unless they hit bodies. So, of the 11 that hit bodies, how many are at least plausible angles? Well, 8 out of the 11 had very large errors. I could break that down. 5 had, I define large as anywhere from 45 to 90-degree errors, and 3 of them had smaller errors, which I would define as 20 to 30 degrees. So, of the 11, only 3 had what I felt were plausible angles. Oh, sorry, that was still, I thought that was a question. I thought we moved on to the question. No, sorry. So he says only 3 had what I felt were plausible angles. It doesn't even mean that they were right or could or did happen, just that it's possible, potentially, that it could have happened that way. And so, and even those that you felt were an error of about 30 degrees. No, the 3 I had no difficulty with. I had 3 no difficulty, 3 errors of 20 to 30 degrees, and 5 errors of 45 to 90 degrees. And would even an error of 20 or 30 degrees completely change the position of the shooter or the position of the body? Yes. Now, just to go through these as quickly as I can, I want to go through these illustrations and posing the question to you with each one based on all of the medical evidence and ballistics evidence and scene evidence and your experience to pose the question, what's wrong with this picture? And let's start with shot number 2 with respect to that picture. First of all, is there any way to know that Mr. Menendez's head was in precisely that position? No. If his head is in a different position, does that change entirely the trajectory? Yes. Is there evidence that contradicts the notion that Mr. Menendez is seated next to him when when that wound is inflicted? Is seated when that wound is inflicted? Yes. Of the evidence is next to him. That was just poorly phrased. Is there evidence next to him that contradicts the notion that Mr. Menendez is seated when that wound is inflicted? Is how she should have worded it, I believe. And he says, and what is that evidence? He says, yes. What was that evidence? There was a piece of brain tissue that appears on the couch right underneath where she's sitting, Mrs. Menendez. So she couldn't have been where she's sitting. Where she, what? Hold on. Let's let it play out. So there was a piece of brain tissue that appears on the couch right underneath where she's sitting. Well, she's not sitting on the couch, but if she was sitting on the couch, I guess it would be where she would have been seated. Now, moving on to shot 4. What's wrong with that picture? Oh, okay. So they're going shot by shot and he's playing it out by the evidence that's on each of these illustrations. I see. So he's pointing out all the different inconsistencies. So now moving on to shot 4, what's wrong with that picture? That's 4B you have up there. I have 4A. Okay, I have it here. Yes, this is one that I considered one of the very largest errors because it depicts a shot coming into her upper face from the side, and the shot very clearly came in from straight ahead. So it's about a 90-degree angle difference on this one. So the angle showing, this is what Dr. Golden calls wound number 2, correct? Yes. The one that goes straight into her head? Yes. It came straight in. So the angle here is wrong? Yes. Is there any evidence to support the notion that her body is even positioned in the position shown there at the time that that wound is inflicted? No. And you understand that the representation in this illustration of Mr. Menendez purports to show him dead before the leg wound, which is numbered 7, is inflicted? Yes. Is that also a mistake? That's a mistake. Mr. Levin, it would be helpful if you would stay here so I don't have to do this. We could go faster. Showing you what purports to be an illustration of shot number 4, is there any reason whatsoever to believe that the injuries to her lower arm and upper arm were inflicted when she was on the ground? No. Is that injury, the double arm injury, entirely consistent with her standing up? Yes. And again, in this shot number 5 depiction, does this purport to represent Mr. Menendez dead? Yes. In your opinion, is he dead before the leg wound is inflicted? No. Okay, Mr. Levin, let's go to 6. With respect to this, which is supposed to be shot 6, you understand that this is supposed to represent Dr. Golden's wound number 3, the mandible, clavicle, and the wound number 10, the right hand. Yes. Is there any evidence whatsoever that supports the notion that Mrs. Menendez is lying down when she receives that wound? No, which he said multiple times on cross-examination with Mr. Khan, and Mr. Khan kept trying to push and push about those, well, if you just change the angle a little bit, well, that changes everything then, doesn't it? So, ugh, okay. Anyways, she asks, are you aware of, not yet. In fact, if she were lying down, when she received that wound, would you expect the wound in her head to distribute differently than they do? Well, yes. There's a major angle problem here also. This angle is shown hitting and going up almost the long axis of her head. And actually, it's described in there's a graze wound under the chin that that verifies this. And all the evidence indicates it's going front to back rather than low to high. Is this wound therefore more consistent with her standing up than lying down? I think so. And if indeed she had been shot in this position, would you have expected pellets to travel upward towards the top of her head? Certainly. And the one possible buckshot pellet that you identified in her x-ray was not at the top of her head, it was at the lower back part, lower in the head. And again, this shot purports to depict Mr. Menendez dead before he receives the leg wound. Is that wrong? No, it's wrong. It does show that, but that is wrong. So that's what's wrong. Yes, showing that. Okay. Can we move? That was confusing. Can we move on? We've already dealt with 7. We're going to go ahead to 8. With respect to 8, do you understand that that purports to represent the thigh wound to Mrs. Menendez that Dr. Golden calls wound number 7? Yes. And it's your opinion that the direction of that wound is from back to front and from bottom to up? Yes. And does this depiction show it in the entirely opposite direction? Does this depiction show it in the entirely opposite direction? Yes, it does. Miss Abramson says, and if you would, could you hold that aside and then put a 9 up next to it? Mr. Levin says, you want them side by side? Miss Abramson says, that's fine. With respect to shot 9A, that's the gutter wound to the left calf. You affiliated that potentially, possibly, with the leg wound, coroner's number 7, correct? Yes. Now, the coroner calls that gutter wound 9 also, so we can use that number for both. Number 9. Obviously, in those two illustrations, the two wounds are being shown coming in opposite directions. Is that right or wrong? Wrong. Even the direction shown on shot 9A, is that accurate with respect to the gutter wound alone? No, there's a larger error in the angle. And is there any evidence to establish that either of these particular wounds were actually inflicted while Mrs. Menendez was lying on her back on the floor? No. You can take those down, Mr. Levin. In fact, Dr. Fackler, are those wounds consistent with Mrs. Menendez on the couch leaning on her right side with her left leg elevated? That particular wound you're talking about is that combination of 9 and 7. Could that have been inflicted while she was leaning on her right side up on the couch with her leg bent in a way that we demonstrated? Yes, I think it's a very plausible way for it to have occurred. So she's leaning on the couch, perhaps. Leaning on her right side up on the couch. And in fact, if she were up on the couch leaning in such a way as to expose that leg to the line of fire, the gun would have been held higher than that would have been necessary to cause those wound affiliations if she were on the ground, correct? Yes. Now, with regard to shot 10, is there anything in the physical evidence that requires her to be in that specific position in order to receive that double in and out wound to her left leg? No. And in fact, let me juxtapose with this 11b. Do you note in 11b that for some reason Mrs. Menendez is portrayed as having turned over on her right side and moved her body back to the couch between shots 10 and shot 11? Yes, I note that. Now it's true, is it not, Dr. Fackler, that when Mrs. Menendez's body was seen by the police, it was in a position where her back was right up against the couch? Objection leading, sustained. I can rephrase it, Your Honor. Objection sustained. In viewing the scene photographs, what position does it show Mrs. Menendez's body vis-a-vis the couch? I think it shows it closer to the couch than we see here. Does it show that she's on her right side? It shows she's on her right side, yes. Does it show her right leg protruding through what's known as the stringer of the shelf of the coffee table? Yes. So her leg was kind of in the, I don't know what a stringer is, but oh, the shelf. So it was a coffee table, and then it had like a shelf underneath it, which her leg was, or her knee, her right leg was through that, or at least, near that or on top of that, leaning on top of that shelf, is what I imagine. Does it show her left leg bent roughly in the way that it's shown in 11B? Yes. And is there any medical reason that compels the notion that when Mrs. Menendez went to the ground, she went to the ground in a position other than her final position? Certainly not. So she wasn't moving. There's nothing that shows that she was moving around. Well, there you have it. This guy says so. Not that he's a forensic pathologist, but according to the OG wound ballistics dude, he says she was the position she was found in on the ground. That's how she went down, basically. Now, with if she were always on her right side on the ground, could a simple variation in the position of her left leg account for shot 10, which is the one? Pull that back for a moment, Mr. Levin. Thank you. What was that question again? All right. If she's on her right side, but her left leg is open, I'm not going to get down and do it, but let's say she's on her right side, but the left leg is cropped up as in 10A. She could have received that on her right side, correct? I see, certainly. In fact, she could have received 10A sitting on the couch with her leg bent. Yes, I think there are many, many different positions she could have received 10A other than what's shown. You may put that down, Mr. Levin. Dr. Fackler, you testified about the phenomenon that's been studied concerning the absence of immediate pain in those who received gunshot wounds, correct? Yes. Do you understand the illustrations that were made by failure analysis suggest, given the sequence, they suggest that Mrs. Menendez rolled over onto her right side at a time when her right upper arm and shoulder, her right forearm, and her right hand were shattered by shotgun blasts? Yes. Now, what is true about shotgun wounds and their immediacy of pain also true about shattered bones and the pain that causes? No, not in slow movements. The absence of pain that I was talking about, which is well supported in the literature, refers simply to the gunshot wounds and also blast wounds. In your opinion, then, for someone to roll over onto her right side purposely when they have all the shattered bone material on the right side, wouldn't that be painful? A painful process? Most likely. Makes sense. If she's injured on the right side and the state is saying that she moved herself onto her right side, that makes no sense. If your injury is on your right side, you're not going to lay on your right side on purpose. All right. So now with respect to shot 11, if we can move 10, just to back up, at some point, obviously, Dr. Fackler, Mrs. Menendez went from an upright position to one on the floor, correct? Yes. And is there anything in the medical evidence that indicates that she did not or could not have received wound 2 to the upper face, wound 3 to the clavicle and collarbone, wound 5? These are Dr. Golden's wounds to the arm, all of those standing up? Certainly. She could have received them all standing up. Certainly. And when someone is wounded and goes down, they don't go down because of the impact of the velocity of the shot, correct? Yes, that is correct. And there was one especially here that in the report, Dr. McCarthy specifically said, I think it was shot 4 to the head, which would cause her to fall down on her back. He very specifically stated that she would not only fall down, but she would fall down on her back. And to me, That indicated that he thought she would have had to be pushed backwards because if you have a shot that hits a person in any position, the head, and they become immediately unconscious, there's really four possibilities. They can fall on their back, on their left side, right side, or front. And for him to say that she had to fall on her back implies to me that he thinks she's being pushed backwards by the bullet to get on her back is the only plausible explanation. Yeah, so she wouldn't fall on her back. Is it more likely that someone would go flat over like like a cardboard cutout of a person, or is it more likely someone crumbles when they are shot? If a person is stationary when they have a shot that disrupts the brain in a situation that causes them to become instantaneously unconscious, they crumble in that their muscles no longer have any way to support them. The muscles crumble and they go straight down, which it appears that's what happened here. If you're looking at it subjectively or objectively, I mean. And the thing is, like, as I'm listening to this, the jury's hearing this, but they still convict anyways. It drives, it infuriates me when the state doesn't prove their case as they lay it out, and the jury buys into it anyways. And that's what I'm seeing happen here, to be honest. And I mean, I saw it in the first one too, but this one is probably even worse because we have some really good forensic experts and wound ballistic experts here, and we're only on the first expert for the defense, so it's gonna get better, I bet. All right. So the next question, when you say straight down, you don't mean backwards, they collapse. No, straight down. In order to fall backwards, if you fall backwards as you described, then you have to assume there's certain tone in the muscles when you do that because the weight is pushing backwards on the legs when you're standing upright. Okay. Now, in order for the knees to remain straight as they are when you're standing upright, the muscles have to continue to have some power and some tone. And when you get a wound, such as the one to the back of the head of Mr. Menendez, the muscles don't have any tone anymore. It's a crumbling, a straight down movement, a falling over like a tree. Like a tree movement certainly implies a continuing few seconds of toneness of the muscle. And it's straight down, not back. Is there anything in the medical or physical or ballistics evidence here that contradicts the notion that Mrs. Menendez was shot on the right side? Those three wounds I've described and have already sustained perhaps other injuries and crumbled down onto her right side. Anything that contradicts that from happening? I couldn't see a thing that would contradict that. Now, there were a whole series of questions yesterday by Mr. Khan about the angle shown in shot 11. Did you take a close look at the scene photographs this morning to see that if the way that Mrs. Menendez's body, is depicted by the anthropomorphic dummy is accurate? Yes, I looked at this and there are a few things that are problematic here. The scale is off. I compared the scene photograph with this, and the scene photograph, her shoulder doesn't, excuse me, in the scene photograph, her shoulder doesn't come to the top of the couch, and here her shoulder comes over the top of the couch. And also, the angle as depicted in this would basically graze here, the top of her head, and does not hit anywhere near below the ear as it shows. So the angle was wrong. Also, Mr. Menendez is shown dead at this time, and I don't think he's supposed to have received 7, so he could be dead at this point. I'm just saying according to what I think, what I would think valid evidence to me, there'd be no way of knowing. So you still don't know. I wouldn't know if he's dead. He's depicted as dead here. At some point he's dead, but you don't know where in the sequence. In my view, I can't see any evidence that would indicate that he'd be depicted as dead when she receives this shot. Okay, let's talk then, though, about the basic concept that the left shoulder and the left neck area are affiliated. You have no quarrel with that? No. You have no quarrel. That's the word that Mr. Khan was using. You have no quarrel that could have occurred while she was lying on the ground. Certainly. Just that the way this depicts the angle would be wrong. That's right. And looking at the scene photograph, is there a more realistic angle that suggests itself from the way her real body is depicted in the scene photograph? It's easier to line up an angle with her in the scene photograph than it is with this, yes. Is it easier to line up an angle that would not require the shooter to either be dangling from the ceiling or standing on the coffee table? Yes. Thank you. Mr. Levin, we're through with those. Mr. Levin says, do you want any others before I leave? No, thank you. All right. Now, you had mentioned, well, first of all, you had mentioned a phenomenon that you were familiar with respect to how people who are presented with the threat of gunfire, a few things that are known about their potential movements. Do you recall that testimony? I think it was during cross examination by Mr. Khan. No, I don't recall that right offhand. Do you remember testifying that there is a phenomenon where people tend to rotate their bodies away from the gun, trying to in the opposite direction? Well, I'm not sure I can say this is a phenomenon. This is merely a something that I have noticed often in the cases that I have been involved in the last 4 or 5 years, that in it is very common for a person to be hit once and then rotate rapidly. I've seen it in at least 5 or 6 cases. I'd like to give you a hypothetical and demonstrate some components of it to you. Now, you understand hypothetically here, there are two shooters and two guns. Yes. Let me put, there is something I want up 24. I am sorry, Mr. Levin, I wasn't thinking. Dr. Fackler, I want you to consider for this hypothetical the following hypothetical facts. First of all, do you understand that to be a diagram of the den? Yes. And I want to call your attention to the left-hand side of the diagram close to where the number 1 appears and suggest to you, hypothetically, that those are the double entry doors to this room. Yes. And I want to suggest to you that my client Erik Menendez and his brother Lyle Menendez, who are the people who did the shooting in this case, entered this room with shotguns through those doors. Yes. Okay. Now, I want to further suggest a hypothetical to you that right after entering, both Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez commenced firing in the direction of the couch towards what they saw was a standing figure of Mr. Menendez and ultimately a standing figure of Mrs. Menendez. Yes. Okay, I want you also to not imagine, but consider hypothetically the following: that Erik Menendez proceeded along a pathway that I am marking with broken lines and wound up in a final position where I am marking with an X. Yes. And from that pathway, without trying to show the angles, because remember, Erik, in first trial, he testified that they came into the room. So the room, how do you I don't know if the doors were like right when you walk in. I don't know if it was like exactly perpendicular or if it was you know, I mean, yeah, if it was perpendicular or parallel to the couch, I'm not really sure. But anywho, they walk into the doors of the den, and they said that Kitty and Jose were standing in front of the couch, in between the couch and the coffee table. And Erik walked in from the entrance of the room, and he stood in between the TV and the coffee table, and he was shooting more so near his mother, whereas Lyle was standing more so near the door, and then he walked around and he shot Jose in the back of the head after he had fallen to the couch. So that is how that's the narrative from the brothers. Okay, I want you also to not imagine, but consider hypothetically the following: that Erik Menendez proceeded along a path and came to this X point. Yes. And from that pathway, without trying to show the angles at all, but from the pathway, he is firing towards the couch randomly. He's firing as he's moving. As he's moving, random fire towards the general area of the two people on the couch. Yes, two people in front of the couch. Standing in front of the couch? Right. I also want you to imagine hypothetically that the second person, and I'm going to mark this EM for Erik Menendez. The second person who enters is Lyle Menendez, and he similarly is firing towards the standing person and persons. The area of the couch, he ultimately veers off in this direction, but continues firing towards the people. Okay? Yes. And at some point, he fires the contact wound to the back of Mr. Menendez's head. Yes. Again, I'm going to show the general direction of fire, okay? Yes. Now, with respect to the wounds to Mr. Menendez and this thing that you've observed about rotation, I want you to assume hypothetically that I am Mr. Menendez. Yes, although a good deal shorter. And that I am standing in the area between, roughly in the area where you see items 14 and 15 on the diagram. Yes. So between the couch and the coffee table. Yes. Now I offer this as one of the 3,600,000 possibilities. Okay. That as he's standing there, the shooters enter to his right. His sons enter from the right. Okay, so they're entering from the right. So it is going to be on, not straight on to the couch. It's going to be coming from the side, and then you see the couch, if that makes sense. So the sons enter from the right. That they are firing. That he receives the wounds. Mr. Menendez receives the wound in the back of his right arm from that direction. That he receives the wound in his left leg as he's standing in that direction. Yes. That he does exactly what you said people do. He rotates. Yes. And receives the wound in his left elbow while he's standing. Yes. And then he collapses. Yes. And there are, meanwhile, other shots being fired. He collapses back into the couch, and that leaves his feet in the position I'm demonstrating them. Do you see them? Yes. Remember, they were not a natural, it's been testified to that his feet were not in a natural seated position. It does look like he may have, uh, they ended up there in an unnatural manner. And she asks, do you see them? Meaning his feet. Yes. In the position, or her feet. In the position of my feet, both crossed and on the outer edges, the position that Mr. Menendez's feet are seen in the scene photographs. If you want to check, I'll show you that. Yes, I'd like to see that. I don't remember that. I don't know if we have a full shot here. You have one of the scene photographs in front of you. You can't see it in that one. Just assume hypothetically that in the scene photographs, he's seen with the left foot, or with the feet, sorry, with the feet. He's seen with the feet crossed on the outer edge of each foot. On the outer edge of each foot. And that's something that happens when the body rotates, but the feet don't move. Yes, I can't see the feet on this one and really didn't concentrate on the feet. We have numerous photographs here, however. You have all of the scene photographs. I know, but I didn't concentrate on the feet. I'm sorry. Is what I just demonstrated to you entirely consistent with the wound evidence and the physical evidence at the scene? Yes, it is. So everything that she just said in her hypothetical, which is how the brothers say it happened, he says it's consistent with the wound evidence. So, and the physical evidence at the scene. So, yeah, he says the way that the brothers say it happened is more consistent than the state's theory. With respect to Mr. Menendez, yes. And the hypothetical that I have suggested by marking Exhibit 24 of these, Erik and Lyle Menendez coming in and firing randomly towards the couch in very rapid succession, pop, 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 is that entirely consistent with the physical and medical evidence in this case? Yes. I have nothing further, Your Honor. So now we go into recross with Mr. Khan. Let's focus first on this scenario that you've just considered, Doctor. Is this reconstruction that you have just postulated your idea? No, but it is the brothers' narrative. It is what they say happened. So whether it's his idea or not, he says it's consistent. So what's your point? Was this morning the first time you heard this reconstruction? No, I read a summary, a one-page summary which really outlines it in words. This is the first time I've seen a this diagram of it. So a one-page summary of what? Of what we're seeing diagrammed here. So the reconstruction I'm asking you about is this reconstruction of the wounds to Jose Menendez, the sequence in which they were inflicted. Is that something that you heard for the first time today? Yes. And that's not your idea. No, I think that's even stronger because this is the first time hearing it. And he's like, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds right to me. But you agree that that is a possible reconstruction. Yes. And is that reconstruction consistent with all of the estimates that you have given in this proceeding concerning distances at which these wounds were inflicted? Yes, I think it is. Okay. The wound to Jose's left arm. How far away was the shooter at the time that the wound to Jose's left arm was inflicted? Let's see. His left arm, I think I said about 12 feet on that. 12 feet away? Approximately. Okay, now in this construction that has just been suggested to you by counsel of the shots fired to Jose Menendez would have to be standing where in order for him to end up in that seated position in which he appears in that diagram? Basically, right in front of that area. Okay, he would be standing right in front of the sofa. Is that correct? Near in front of it, yes. Do you know how far away from that sofa he would have to be in order for him to end up in that seated position? Well, one of the problems is I don't think that it's a static scene. I don't think he stood and remained stationary during this. I think he was moving, the boys were moving, and therefore distances change. And by the boys, positions change. By the boys, are you referring to the two men on trial here? The two shooters, yes. All right, in the initial position in which he was struck in the right arm, can you tell us where he was in relation to this? In relation to the sofa at the time that that shot was inflicted. Now you're asking, you just asked about the left arm. Now you're asking about the right arm? Yes, I'm asking about the right arm. And which shot to the right arm? Oh, well, how many shots did he receive to the right arm? Two at least. Okay, can you tell us which wound to the right arm he received first? No. In the reconstruction that was just suggested to you, does it make any difference as in order for that to be possible, which wound was received first? One would think that the one in the antecubital fossa would probably have been received first. You're referring to the inside part of the right arm? Yes. Okay, so that the Jose Menendez would have been facing the shooter at that time. Not necessarily. The arm is very movable, so you don't know really where the arm is in relation to the way he's facing. That's a great point. Okay, you're saying that the arm could have been facing towards his back like this. This is one possibility. There's lots of possibilities with both arms. I mean, you can raise them over your head, you can lean over and touch your toes, you can extend them out, you can extend them back, you can extend them forward. Plus, when you're moving and the shots are coming, there's multiple different angles and variations. So there's almost an infinite number of possibilities, he says. In the reconstruction that was just suggested to you by counsel right here, right now, what was your understanding based upon the hypothetical as to where the position of his right arm at the time that the first shot was fired? Not a word was mentioned in the hypothetical about the position of the arms. In order for that reconstruction to work, where does his right arm have to be relative to the shooter's? I don't, you mean distance-wise, or what are you speaking of? This portion of his right arm has to be facing the shooters. When that shot hits, yes, it has to be. Actually, I think we're getting confused about static positions and moving. If he's moving this arm rapidly and the shot comes from the shooter and the shot happens to impact at this position, that would be about right. But it doesn't mean that he has to be standing in any one position because there's rapid movement going on, and that's why it's so very, very difficult to pin down a definite position and try to depict it in a static photo, which is what those failure analysis diagrams are. Now, why is it your opinion that the shot to the inside of the right arm probably preceded the shot to the back of the right arm? The distance was further for the shot for the inside. And what is the difference in distance between the shot to the inside of the right arm and the shot to the back of the right arm? Well, the shot to the inside of the right arm is a further distance, maybe 10, 12 feet or more, but the shot to the back of the right arm out the front is much closer, maybe 3 to 4 feet. So maybe while Lyle was moving around to the back of the couch, he was getting closer to Jose, and that's when the much closer shot happened. To the back of the arm. That's when he might have at that point turned around. So this absolutely fits the defense's theory. He would have been turned around, like pivoting around, and that's why the back of the right arm. And it's closer. So that makes absolute perfect sense. The first shots were fired from further away. He did the first injury to the right arm. And then Lyle, or one of them did. And then, as Lyle, most likely, as he's the one walking behind the couch, he's getting closer to Jose distance wise, and he's still firing. And that's probably, and at that point, Jose's pivoted um, to where his back is now facing Lyle, and he gets shot in the back of the arm. Makes perfect sense. Are you suggesting that the shot to the inside of the right arm preceded the shot to the back of the right arm because the shooter needed additional time to get closer to the victim? That, looking at the diagram here, that would seem to be the logical reason, yes. It's just like, you know what? Yeah, that's logical. So it is your opinion in this case that Jose Menendez was shot first to the inside of the right arm and then to the back of the right arm. Is that correct? I certainly couldn't be certain about that because we have two shooters at different distances from him. Could have been simultaneous with one behind him and one in the front of him. It's impossible to say. Well, in the hypothetical that counsel was giving you just now, did you understand that hypothetical to include the possibility that there was one shooter in front of him and one shooter behind him? I understood it to confirm to the way that this is drawn and the final position of the shooters is exactly that. And according to this drawing here, counsel is hypothesizing that Erik Menendez entered here along this route that is in red and fired all along the shots along this route. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Yes. And she's also hypothesizing that there was a second shooter over here who moved along this blue route. Is that correct? Yes. Now, you indicated that Jose Menendez, at the time for this shooting to have taken place, would have been immediately in front of the sofa. Is that correct? At the time that a portion of it occurred, not the entire shooting. As I mentioned, he would be mobile, I would expect. Well, for the shooters to be on both sides of him, where would he have to be? He would have to be somewhere between immediately in front of the couch to in front of the square brownish table, somewhere in that general area. So are you considering the possibility that there were two shooters that were on either side of him here, and that he was in the middle there, and then these two shooters are both facing him and shooting at the same time? That's something one must consider. And then after being shot here, is it your belief that he walked over to the couch and sat down on the sofa? He staggered, walked, rotated, turned, he got there somehow. Probably collapsed. I'm just not, or I'm just saying where you placed him out there, I can't say he wasn't that far away. He might have been closer, he might have been that far. There are an infinite there are infinite possibilities, and I can't tell you which one is closer. He might have even tripped, like he might have when he rotated, he might have even fallen backwards then if he was close enough to the couch and tripped on the couch. But do you not rule out the possibility you're telling us that there are shooters on either side of him shooting him at the same time? Is that correct? Yes. Okay. And if there are two shooters on either side of him shooting him at the same time, then the shot to the interior of the arm does not have to precede the shot to the back of the arm. Is that correct? I never said it did. So you have no idea as to whether or not the shot to the interior of the arm preceded the shot to the back of the arm. Is that correct? That's correct, yeah. That would be purely speculative on your part. Is that correct? Yes, I said because of the fact that there are two shooters, you would have one position in a different. All I said was the distance of the fire is different. I didn't speculate on any order of the shots. So that's another good point. Like Lyle didn't have to be the one doing all those shots to Jose. It could have been Erik that got him on because Erik was standing further away closer to the TV. Maybe he got Jose on the interior of the arm, and then as Lyle was walking closer to the couch and he was approaching Jose, he got the back of the arm as Jose was rotating. I don't know. Any of these possibilities, he said, there's many possibilities. So both are possible, probably. All right. But now, is it your opinion then that as far as sequencing is concerned, you do have the opinion that the shots to the arms preceded the shot to the leg? Is that correct? I think they probably did, yes. Well, you don't really think that he was shot first in the leg over by the coffee table and then he walked over to the sofa on that leg and was then shot in the arms, do you? No, I don't think that. Okay, so wouldn't a shot to the leg like that have caused him to collapse immediately? Very close to immediately, yes. Depending on which leg he had his weight on, he would have been fairly close to his final resting place. And you said that the shot to the head would have been the last shot. Is that correct? Yes. So you are certain about the fact then, in terms of sequencing, that the shots to the arms preceded the shots to the leg, and the shot to the leg preceded the shot to the head. Is that correct? I wouldn't use the word certain. Okay, well, are you telling us that perhaps he was shot to the head while he was over by the coffee table, and then after being shot to the head, he walked over to the sofa and sat down on the sofa? No, I think when he already said that the shot to the head was the final shot. He says, no, I think when he was shot in the head, he was either standing right next to the sofa or was already in the position he's in. Okay, when he was shot there in the head. Okay, so you think that perhaps he was standing when he was shot in the head and then he then sat down after being shot to the head? I would not use the words sat down because that implies a voluntary act, and I don't think he had any voluntary acts. He would have collapsed in that position. But do you think it's possible that first he was shot to the head and then sometimes after being shot to the head, he was shot to the arms? I think that's unlikely. And you rule that out, don't you? I don't rule anything in or out, but I think it's highly unlikely. So there is nothing about these wounds indications as to whether they're antemortem or postmortem that would cause you to rule out the possibility that first he was shot in the head and sometime later he was shot then to the arms. I see no evidence to indicate that. Do you think that the wound to the back of the head was a fatal wound? Excuse me, I didn't hear the question. Do you think that was a fatal wound? I've testified to that, yes. And how fast do you think that death would have occurred after he was shot to the back of the head? Instantaneously. When death is instantaneous, the heart stops beating? No, that's not true. The heart continues to beat? It may well, yes. And you continue to have antemortem wounds after death. The definition of death is difficult. In some of the testimony that I had read previously, the court had asked a question in this trial which went unanswered, and that was, does the heart continue to beat after the brain can be destroyed? And the answer is very distinctly yes. The heart can continue to beat. Not for long, but it can. It's not like an instant stop. Your brain is the signal. So your heart can continue to beat until it stops, receiving that signal, if that makes sense. Like the signal's still going for those last beats, and then it, it, its signal is no longer. So the heart is supplied by two sets of nerves on which speeds one which speeds it up. So two sets of nerves, one which speeds it up and the other which slows it down. But they're basic regulatory nerves. The heart does not depend on these nerves for its beating. The heart can beat independently of these nerves. Now the lungs, the respiration movement is entirely different. The shot to his head would have caused breathing to stop immediately. However, it is likely that the heart would have kept beating. We've seen this in many cases. We have clear evidence that this happens. For instance, if you take a person who has tremendous damage to the brain, you can put this person on life support and keep this person alive as an organ donor. And what is meant is his heart continues to beat if you supply respiratory movements that are no longer possible. So, yes, the heart is likely, duh. The heart is likely to keep beating for some time, maybe up to 5 minutes after death. Other times it may stop shortly. No way to know. Plus, your heart is an electric current of its own, so it probably does continue for a short time after on its own electrical energy, which is crazy to think about. Anyways, getting back to this reconstruction that was suggested to you by counsel, is it your opinion that the shot to the leg necessarily came after the shots to the arms? Necessarily, no. So, for you, anything is possible. You're not ruling out any possible sequence of shots, is that correct? Miss Abramson says, objection, argumentative. Overruled. You can answer the question. The witness says, I'm ruling out very, very little. I was asked in this hypothetical if the evidence that I know of in any way contradicts it, and my answer was no. The evidence does not contradict it. It is possible, and I would probably give the same answer to 1,000 more hypotheticals that were different than this. I love his answers. Like he's not backing down. Mr. Khan says, okay. The witness says, it's just impossible to know, and I've said that from the very beginning in this case. Okay, so you've been a doctor. An alternate juror says, I'm having trouble understanding what's being displayed as information here. The court says, do you want to ask a question or something like that? An alternate juror says, I would, Your Honor. The court says, you have to put it in writing. Mr. Khan says, Sir, you've been a doctor for 31 years. Is that correct? About that, yeah. Okay, and you're telling us that with your medical training, you cannot shed any light whatsoever on the sequence of wounds in this case, any more than a layman can. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative. Overruled. I don't believe I said that. Okay, then what can you tell us concerning the sequence of wounds, the possibility or probability of that sequence to Jose Menendez based on your medical training as a doctor? I can tell you that he lost all voluntary movement and all capacity to breathe immediately upon receiving the shot to the back of the head. And I can tell you that if he was standing and supporting his weight equally on both legs, he would have collapsed almost immediately after receiving the shot to the leg. So the leg wound could have collapsed him. I can't tell you on Mrs. Menendez that she would have lost all voluntary motion. Or I can tell you that she would have lost all voluntary motion. He cuts her off and says, let's just stay on Jose Menendez for one moment. Well, we've ended with him then. That's all I can tell you. Getting back to my question of the sequencing of the wounds to his body, what that was the question I was asking you. What can you tell us concerning the sequencing of wounds to Jose Menendez based upon your medical training as a doctor? Can you tell us anything? Ms. Abramson says, asked and answered, and this form is argumentative. Overruled. You can answer the question. I thought I answered it. I thought I answered it. I told you what I can tell you about from my training what happened, what would happen after certain wounds that are with certainty, and that's the one to the back of the head, which caused him to become immediately unconscious and lose the capacity to breathe. By sequencing, I'm asking you to make reference to the various different shots in this case and tell us if you can, shed any light on which shots preceded other shots and to what degree of certainty to each that you can express such an opinion. Well, I could express to a high degree of certainty that the shot to the back of the head did not occur with him in front of the brown table. It would have had to occur with him standing immediately in front of the couch if he was standing. It could have occurred with him sitting in the position he's already in. So he could have been standing or he could have been sitting. Once again, Doctor, I'm asking you to tell us if you have any opinion concerning the relative sequence. You understand what I mean by the relative sequence of shots. I'm asking you to connect the shots if you can. I'm telling you what I can tell you about what we would expect from the actions of Jose Menendez after the shots that I can tell you with a high degree of certainty, and that is the one to the back of the head and the one to the leg. And I just told you that, and I can't tell you anything more about sequence. Well, what can you tell us concerning the sequence of the shot to his leg and the shot to the back of his head? I can't tell you the sequencing of the two, but I can tell you he was near the couch when he got both of them, if not on the couch when he got the one to the back of the head. So you cannot shed any light whatsoever on whether or not the shot to the leg preceded or followed the shot to the head. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Okay, now in the hypothetical reconstruction that was suggested to you by counsel, were you necessarily including as part of that hypothetical the fact that Jose Menendez was in a moving position? I don't think the movement was mentioned during the hypothetical. I was assuming that the motion was therefore not ruled out by the hypothetical, and therefore I've told you what I could do with certainty. Now, in your questioning, you have asked me to tell you what I can establish with a high degree of certainty, and have told you, and what I can tell you with a high degree of certainty. If you want to ask me what my opinion is, for instance, my opinion is that the wound to the left leg came while he was standing and he collapsed and got the head wound later, but I can't tell you that with a high degree of medical certainty. All right, can you tell us which way Jose Menendez was standing during this reconstruction suggested to you by counsel that this uh, was he facing the shooters during the entire hypothetical that you considered, or did he have his back to the shooters during the entire hypothetical? He was moving and the shooters were moving, and I think the question you've asked is impossible to answer. Okay, now for the shot to the back of the arm, I take it that he had his back to the shooters at that moment in time, to the shooter who actually shot him. He, well, not necessarily. Yeah, the shooter was in back off to his right side at the time that that shot was fired, and he may well have been moving. So that may have been a stop frame on a continuous movement at that point. So one of the shooters had to be somewhere behind him for that particular shot. The person who shot him had to be somewhere behind him at that moment of the shooting. Is that correct? Somewhere behind him relative to his moving, yes. Okay, and now for the shot to the inside of the right arm. Can you tell us the range that he would have been facing relative to the shooter in order for that shot to have taken place? Objection, Your Honor. Confusing question. It's vague. Do you understand the question? I think so. Okay. When we were talking about the previous shot to the upper arm, the upper part of the arm, and we're talking with a great deal more certainty as to where the shooter would be in relation to him, where the shooter would because sorry, I read the same line twice. Because I believe that the arm was in a fixed position in contact with the chest at that time, so I know where the arm was at that time. Because of the unlimited, practically unlimited scope of movement of the arm, when we're talking about the other shot of the arm, it becomes highly problematical. Okay, when you say highly problematical, are you saying that for that shot to the right inner arm, he could have been within a range of the full 360 degrees relative to the shooter? Could you restate that question? I'm not clear on it. Yes, in other words, for the shot for the inside of the right arm, there is no limitation to the number of positions that he could have been relative to the shooter, so he could have been anywhere within a full range of a 360-degree circle. That is assuming Deputy District Attorney Nahara is the shooter here. He could have been anywhere within the full 360-degree circle at the time that this shot to the right arm is fired. No, I didn't say that. Well, can you tell us what the possible range would have been relative to the shooter if it was not that full 360-degree circle that I just suggested to you? Well, the easiest way to demonstrate this, and I don't think we have one of these in the courtroom, there are small artist models that you have articulated, joints, and I use these frequently in the courtroom where you can and this would be perfect to illustrate to answer your question. We have those here, says the court. The witness says, do you have them? If I could have one, I could answer this question much better. Thank you, Your Honor. Now, with this, we're speaking of this one right here. So anywhere we can move this arm would correspond to a position you can move a human arm, and this is a little bit different. The court says this is Exhibit 204 that he is using. The witness says, pardon me? The court says, I'm just identifying the exhibit number. That's Exhibit 204. The witness says, so whether or not, if I put the model in this position and you just rotate the arm, how far the spread is, it's about a 160-degree spread just from rotating it. I can put the arm in various other positions, and there's almost an infinite number of positions. This arm doesn't go as far in front of the human arm, or it doesn't go in front as the human arm does. But I think you can get the idea of what I'm trying to say of the unlimited almost. Now it is limited in that it's not 360 degrees with a person standing in this one position. In other words, if I had through my arm, if I were hit here in my arm and the injury were the shooter, and the jury were the shooter. Oh my God, it's been a long day. I'm sorry. Let me slow down. If I were hit here in my arm and the jury were the shooter, I could turn my body in various positions and put my arm up and down in various ways. As long as they could see this position of the arm, any of those would be possible. However, if I turn my back like this and hold my arm like this, where they can't see these entrance wounds, it's impossible. So I think that's the limitation possibly you're seeking. Mr. Khan says, well, but your opinion concerning the wound to the right arm, wasn't it also part of your opinion that there was an exit and that exit was on the forearm, the back of the right forearm? Yes. So that would also limit the range, is that correct? Well, no, I mean the path through the arm. Unfortunately, this is what was depicted here is closer to the wound on the upper arm. Actually, we're talking forearm about the one you're asking me about here, which further increases your But if the entrance is here and you have somewhat of an angle like so, therefore you not only have to see this, but it would have to line up to the angle towards you. And so that somehow, or that would somewhat limit it, yes. And this one does not show up well because this is just very gross estimate. But we don't have any probe through the arm at the elbow area in this dummy. I didn't understand any of that. And is it your opinion that the gunshot wound to the right inner arm was the entrance wound and the exit was on the dorsal aspect of the right forearm rather than vice versa? Probably, but there's certainly no way of knowing for sure. Okay, and at least according to Dr. Golden, who was described the wounds in this case, the shotgun wound to the right inner arm is in fact an entry wound. That was his opinion, yes. And that was his opinion in both the 89 report as well as the 95 supplement. Is that right? Yes, that is correct. But the problem is that it is very, very difficult to tell entrance from exit when you're talking about a small distance of travel like an extremity because the bullet or projectile loses very little velocity. If you're talking about a handgun, that makes sense. If you're talking about a handgun wound through a torso, that's different because have a fairly round entrance wound and more slight like exit because it lost velocity coming out. If it's going a short path, it's crushing tissue the whole way through, and those two can resemble one another. So the exit and entry can look very similar. Now, while you told us that Jose Menendez might have been standing over by the coffee table for all you know at the time that he received the wounds to his right arm, would you agree that Jose Menendez had to be either sitting on the sofa or standing immediately in front of the sofa at the time that he received the wound to his leg? He would have had to be very close to the sofa, depending on the position of and spread of both his legs. If he had had his legs spread apart and his face and was facing sideways, he could have rotated and moved his body a few feet, but he would have had to been very close to that area. Yes. Okay, because that shot to the leg would cause him to collapse, isn't that correct? Yes, it would. Unless he had something to support himself on, he would have had to have collapsed from that, or unless he hopped, which I think is unlikely. So there are certain things concerning human behavior that you do rule out in forming an opinion concerning the shots in this case. Is that correct? Argumentative, Judge. I don't know what you're referring to. In other words, hopping, that's something that you're ruling out, even though it's medically possible that he could have been hopping around after being shot in the leg. You ruled that out? No, I didn't. I said it's unlikely. I didn't rule it out. Are you not listening, Mr. Khan? 'Cause it doesn't sound like you're listening. Okay, now turning to the wound to his left elbow. You said that once again, the wound to his left elbow could have been inflicted consistent with the hypothetical that was given to you this morning by counsel, in which Erik Menendez goes into the center of the room and the other shooter approaches towards the sofa. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, now your estimate for the wound to the left elbow yesterday was 14 feet. Is that correct? Plus or minus 4. Yes. Okay, do you think that there is 14 feet of Jose Menendez, if Jose Menendez was standing over by the coffee table on the left side of this coffee table, as we're looking at this diagram, do you think that there's 14 feet from there over to any of the paths of Erik Menendez or 14 feet to the door? I think there's probably 10 feet to the door, and I used 14 feet as a gross estimate and specifically said that was a plus or minus 4. So he's like, it was probably closer to 10 then. So, in order for this scenario to take place, then what you're saying is that the shooter must have fired if he was standing near the coffee table. The shooter must have fired immediately upon entering the door, striking him in the left elbow for us to get that. What you believe to be a 10-foot distance. Is that correct? No, that's not correct. That's one possibility. In the first place, we don't know where he was. He could have been closer to the couch. Second, if he were closer to the couch, where this I think it's supposed to be Erik Menendez, where the EM is certainly 10 feet away. I think there's several possibilities. Where the are you referring to, what are you referring to? The ER at the end of the path, the X, and then the ER right above it. If he's at the couch 10 feet from there. You believe there's 10 feet there? I think so. So, in order for that shot to take place, you would have to go to the lowest part of your 14-foot estimate. That is the 10-foot range. Is that correct? Well, not necessarily. I don't think the hypothetical was meant to imply that Eric Menendez had to be in exactly that position. He may have been a couple feet further on. I don't think we can say that I was given that as a rough idea. Maybe the angle went up more towards the TV. I just don't know, but I assume there was some variation on it. Now, can you tell us why you concluded that it was more likely that the shots to the right arm preceded the shots to the left arm? Shots to the Go through that again now? Yes. Can you tell us why you concluded that it was more likely that the shots to the right arm of Jose Menendez preceded the shots to his left arm? When did I say that? Objection, Your Honor. He never said that. The witness says, I don't recall saying that. Mr. Khan says, is that your opinion? I don't have an opinion on that. So counsel was just expressing to you one possibility, which you said is possible. Is that correct? That is correct. How many more times do I have to tell you, buddy? You're not getting it. Okay. And it's your opinion that first Jose Menendez could have received two shots to the right arm, then could have been shot to his leg, and could then have been shot to his left arm, which was followed by a shot to the head. Is that the sequence that you said is possible? I don't. I have from the very beginning of this case refused to give a sequence because I think it is very likely to mislead. I don't think it's possible for anyone to sequence this accurately, and I'll not give you a sequence. Again, he's said this from the very beginning of his testimony. Anything is possible. Is that what you're saying? No. I told you there are certain facts in this case I can give you with certainty, and I've mentioned them. I'll mention them again. One is the shot to the back of the head, the other is the shot to the leg. I think both of those occurred when he was near his final resting place, and if you want to limit it to him, that's about it. That's about it. Okay, now for Kitty Menendez, do you have an idea concerning the sequence of shots that was fired to her? I would suspect that the contact wound to her cheek was probably the last. And why would you suspect that that was the last? Because I don't think that she would have any conscious movement after that shot. And you have no further opinion concerning sequencing, is that correct? That's correct. Now, did you say that you did not see the illustrations in this case prior to testifying? The illustration that you showed me yesterday, I didn't have any chance to. I never saw the complete set. I think I saw just the last very small portion of Dr. McCarthy's testimony, and I think you may have used a few during that, and I knew they were up there. I had not set until after you presented them to me. We went through them yesterday. And the first time I got any chance to study them was when I saw them when you presented them and asked me your hypothetical questions to assume that if the angles aren't exactly right, is this medically possible? That type of questioning. And so had not studied them at all, and had not ever seen them, but I did get a set of them then, and I did study them last night. He's prepared. Okay, so all of the conversations that you had with other people, I believe that you said that you spoke to Dr. Baden and Cyril Wecht and so on and so forth. All of those conversations that you had with these people are conversations you had before you even looked at the illustrations in this case. Is that correct? Before I looked at these particular illustrations, I had looked at the report that Mr. McCarthy had sent, which does have illustrations on it. Again, we're going doctor to Mr. to doctor to Mr. McCarthy. He's a PhD, so he is technically a doctor, but he's not a medical doctor. And we continue to go back and forth from Mr. to doctor, which I just kind of find funny because his credentials kind of, I mean, not that he may be a doctor for real, I don't know, but it's just funny that what he's purported himself to be as this wound ballistic biomechanical engineer type when he's clearly not and doesn't have the expertise of what he's testifying to. I just find it funny that they're going back and forth between Mr. and Doctor. Anyways, sorry. His answer was I had looked at the report that Mr. McCarthy had sent, which does have illustrations on it. I have also read this, read his, there was some, I think it might have been, I'm not sure if it was a person to person meeting or what type of discovery, but it was a question and answer session. You said Dr. McCarthy's report had the illustrations attached to it? Not these illustrations. It had illustrations. It had illustrations where he'd taken the human form of the male and the female from the front and from the back and had his technicians or he himself put on there the places where he estimated the damage to be and he numbered it. And then he used that numbering and those illustrations to illustrate his report. And so that's what I had available and that's what I studied. So you're talking about a chart which shows the placement of the wounds, is that correct? Yes, his chart. Okay, but as far as this shot sequence illustrations, you had never seen the shot sequence illustrations as you were discussing Dr. McCarthy's theory with people such as Dr. Bodden, Dr. Golden, and so on and so forth. Is that correct? As I just mentioned, I was discussing the sequencing as very clearly stated in his report. I had not seen these particular depictions of it before. Like, are you not understanding his answers? He said no. Okay, now, you indicated in your testimony this morning that there was no evidence that 12 shots were fired in this case. Is that correct? Yes. What is your opinion concerning the number of shots that were fired? I don't know. No idea whatsoever. Can you give us a range? Well, I think 9 or 10, maybe 11, maybe 12. I don't know. Somewhere in that range. So 9 to 12. Is that the best you can pin it down? I don't think I can get any closer than that. Okay, maybe 13. I mean, it's just impossible to know. Okay. And did you make an effort to try to determine the number of shots that were fired in this case? No, I just said I thought it was impossible to know. So why would I make an effort to find out something I didn't think is possible to find out? That he's starting to get irritated with the incessant questioning and him not listening to his answers. So, what you're saying is you simply look at the complexity of the shooting and you say this is too difficult to figure anything out. I'm not even going to try. I'm not even going to try to associate wounds or consider the pellet evidence or consider which wounds could have been caused by the same shot. You simply say it's too complicated. I'm not going to try. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative, compound. Sustained, finally, sustained. That was terrible. Terrible question. Mr. Khan says, in looking at the evidence in this case, did you rule out the possibility of figuring out the number of wounds before you made an effort to compute the number of wounds? Can you restate that? That's unclear to me. Yes. Did you rule out the possibility of determining the number of shots fired before you even attempted to determine the number of shots fired? Did I rule out the possibility? I didn't even really think of it. That's not something that presented with this case, that trying to determine the number of shots would be way down the line of something I would try to do. I would be looking at the autopsy report. I would be looking at the scene photographs. I would be looking at all the photographs and trying to see if there is any association. Then later, maybe I would go give a rough estimate, which I have just given you. And if you're saying that I didn't make any effort to try to do to relate any shots, I think, counsel, you must know that's false. I do think you have my report, don't you? Do I have your report? I believe you do, don't you? I don't know. Let me ask you this. You don't know if he has what? You don't know if you have his report. Are we going to complain and say, "Well, we didn't get the unredacted report," which judge has already told you it's not for you. What the redacted parts are irrelevant. You don't need it. You can do your case without it. You can do a full examination without it. Move on. But no, he's going to be like, "Oh, I don't know if I have your report because I don't have the unredacted version," which he's not even supposed to talk about, probably. So let's see. He says, "Well, let me ask you this. In looking at the testimony of Dr. McCarthy, were you looking for areas of disagreement with him?" "I was looking for areas in which he made declarations that were just flat out false." "And one of the things that he did in his testimony was he gave an opinion concerning the number of shots that were fired. Is that correct?" Yes, he did that." "Okay, and did you think at that point, well, maybe it's time for me to take a hard look at this evidence and determine in my own mind if I can come up with a number of shots fired?" "No, I never contradicted Dr. McCarthy's number of shots fired because there was so much other fertile ground for contradiction that I never really contradicted it. It may well be 12, and that was within my range. I don't argue with that. We had very blatant contradictions, like the fact that the breast tissue is much softer than muscle tissue and easier to penetrate, which is flat out wrong, which he swears to a high degree of certainty without any equivocation is true. And we had other things, he says. This is all this did for the prosecution. To answering this or asking this question, prosecution just opened it wide open for him to basically give all of his reasons why McCarthy is why he sucks, why his opinion shouldn't be counted. And we had other things. He says that he could look at the wound on Jose's leg and declare, despite what the autopsy forensic pathologist said, that he can look at the wound and declare that it is postmortem wound when he has absolutely no training to do this. There were such and declare this unequivocally. There were such fertile ground for disagreement that I really didn't need to get into the number of shots. So yeah, maybe 12 is the number of shots. think I don't think the prosecutor wanted that answer. He asked a question on, well, he's starting to get to this particular witness. As you can see, this witness is like firing back, and I'm loving it. I'm here for it. He's like, no, I'm not going to take this sitting down anymore. Um, where were we? So yeah, 12. Maybe 12 is the number of shots. And you have no way of determining based upon your own experience. Is that correct? I haven't tried. Doctor, you spent 50 hours working on this case, is that correct? At least. And was it your intention before you came in here as a witness to try to shed some light on the shooting, if you could? Or was it your intention when you came in here to leave this shooting as complicated and as unascertainable as possible, simply for the purpose of discrediting Dr. McCarthy? Objection, argumentative. Overruled. That was 100% argumentative. Not at all. My purpose was to establish and share with you what I could with certainty, and which I have done, and also to point out to you that the many gross errors made by Dr. McCarthy, and also share with you the fact that none of my very able friends in forensic pathology think that it is possible with two shooters and two victims to sequence shots. Mr. Khan says, I would object as hearsay, Your Honor. Overruled. The answer will stand. Let me show you the exhibit that has been marked as 299. Now, here on the floor near the door is an object that is circled. And did you hear the testimony of Dr. McCarthy concerning that particular object? No, I didn't. Okay, assuming that this is a piece of body part there, and assuming that That was testified to by the investigating officer in this case. Do you have any opinion concerning how that body part could have gotten over there? Do you wish to share with me what body part it was determined to be? A piece of flesh. What appeared to be a piece of flesh. Objection. There has been no such testimony describing it as flesh. Sustained. You're asking me to assume it's a body part, any body part? A piece of tissue. A piece of tissue from human body is what you're asking me to assume. Correct. This means also a blood clot, also, right? It could be a blood clot. No, not a blood clot, a piece of tissue. Well, blood is tissue. I'm sorry, I snorted. I snort when things are really funny. So the question from Fancy Pants Mr. Khan trying to catch up this incredibly knowledgeable expert says, no, not a blood clot, a piece of tissue. And his response is, well, blood is tissue, you freaking moron. So I love it. So how large would a blood clot be? Well, a blood clot could be any size from minute to huge. It's somewhat limited to the body of blood in the body. Uh, but a blood clot can be really any size. It depends on how much blood. What I see here, and I haven't looked at this, I couldn't tell if this is a blood clot of approximately, I don't know, appears to be maybe a little over an inch long and maybe less than half an inch wide. It could be a blood clot. It could be a piece of muscle. It could be a blood-stained piece of almost anything. All right. Assuming the testimony in this case is that it is tissue, are you saying that a blood clot is nothing more than tissue? Blood is certainly a kind of tissue. I would expect that the doctor would know. So, human tissue from the flesh. Your Honor, I think the question's argumentative. The witness says blood is human tissue. Now, there are various kinds of human tissue: muscle, brain, connective tissue, there's breast tissue, there's many. There's bone is tissue, fingernails are tissue, the eyes are tissue, the hair is tissue, anything in the human body is tissue. Blood is also tissue. So, if you can define it a little more closely, if you want to say it's muscle, would you like to say it's muscle? Mr. Khan says, assuming that it's muscle. Yeah. He wasn't even gonna like try to outsmart the expert there. We'll just assume it's muscle. We'll go with your thing, and we'll go with your thing and just yeah, forget I'm an idiot. Ms. Abramson says, I'm going to object to that, Your Honor. There's no foundation for that question. The court says, sustained. I think the testimony was it was some sort of body matter. Mr. Khan says, all right, assuming further testimony is going to establish that that is not just blood. Ms. Amerson says, objection, Your Honor. There's been no offer of any such further testimony. The court says you can rephrase the question. Let me ask you, just to clarify, you're talking about a blood clot? Um, the court says that the court is saying this. You're talking about a blood clot. Was there any evidence that there was blood clotting that would have been in that position from what you've seen in the evidence? The witness says, well, there's a lot of blood clot around the scene, and whether or not a small piece of this blood clot would have been carried over there, I don't know, Your Honor. The court says you mean by a technician or somebody walked over there or it moved over there after the shooting had been completed. That's a possibility. So during the shooting itself, though, could the shooting have accounted for that being a blood clot in that position is my question. So this is the court asking questions, FYI. We haven't, Mr. Khan hasn't gone back to asking. The witness says, well, it's difficult to know. It depends on the relative positions. I don't know. It's possible that in one of the short range blasts where there's an explosive exit wound, a piece of muscle that large could be expelled. That's very unusual, but I can't say it can happen. Can't happen. Bone, a lot of bone has been missing in this case, and that could be a piece of bone that has blood on it, and therefore you can't identify the architecture as bone. And there are lots of pieces of bone that have been knocked out of the various parts in this case, so I don't know what it is. Mr. Khan says, when the court says, okay, let's stick with the clotting here for a moment to pursue it. Clotting, that's a little bit of time. Clotting takes a little bit of time to be accomplished, does it not? The witness says, usually, yes. How long does it take for a blood to clot? Well, it depends on the state of the individual and a lot of things, but it might take a few minutes. Okay, all right, you may proceed. Mr. Khan asks, based upon the scenario that was given to you by counsel in this morning, the hypothetical, can you tell us how that tissue, whatever that tissue consists of, could have ended up in that position? As I just mentioned, it could be a piece of tissue blown out of one of the explosive type wounds we've had. One that hit the bone or maybe even one that didn't hit bone. Well, which ones are you referring to as the explosive type wounds? Any of the wounds were the close range wounds, the one on his upper arm, the one on the leg, and several on Mrs. Menendez. Okay. In the hypothetical that was given to you this morning, did you not contemplate as part of that hypothetical that the let me direct your attention back to this diagram that did not contemplate as part of this hypothetical that the shooters would either have been closer to the top part of the room, as it appears here, which would be north, or that the shooters would have been to the left side of the diagram at all times during the shooting. Objection, Your Honor, vague. And the witness doesn't understand the question, anyways. The court says, okay, he doesn't understand. Let me rephrase it. Within the range of movement that you gave us to make the hypothetical of counsel work, you were contemplating, were you not, a movement of Jose Menendez somewhere between immediately in front of the sofa there over to somewhere in the immediate vicinity of the coffee table. Is that correct? To the left side of the coffee table? Yes, that's my estimate. Okay, and within that range of movement, didn't you also contemplate that the shooters would have been somewhere in the paths illustrated by those red marks and blue marks that counsel gave to you as part of her hypothetical? Well, the hypothetical said that was their entrance. It doesn't say that they came in, stopped, and stayed there. So, were you considering as part of the hypothetical that counsel gave you this morning that in addition to the routes described here in her hypothetical, that they were also traveling around the sofa and shooting at him from other angles? Well, I would assume that after they reached these positions that they wouldn't have remained there stable. I don't know where they would have gone, but they might have. I don't think well, who knows? It's just impossible to say. Well, didn't you understand the hypothetical of counsel to be referring to one shooter coming in from the door and going over to the point indicated here and firing during this specific route? Wasn't that the hypothetical that was given to you? Until he got there, yes. But then the hypothetical was sort of discontinued at that point. I wouldn't think he would just walk in straight firing and stop. I would think he would do something after that. The same with the other shooter. And I don't know what they would have done. The question that was put to you by counsel didn't ask you to make assumptions concerning moving around the room, did it? It gave me what we see up here, and I assumed that that was to be the entrance of the two boys. I did not hear this as saying that was the limitation or that was the exact spot. I mean, I looked at this as this was the basic direction they're coming in, and the basic area. And by rather than coming straight in there, just, walking right on the line and stopping on that X and not doing anything more. And by boys, are you referring to the two men on trial? Yes, I'm sorry, yes. Like, okay, boys, men, whatever. They're still very young men, boys. In my opinion, they're boys. But the state wants you to think, no, these are grown men and they knew exactly what they were doing. They're just vicious, uh, greedy, rich kids. Okay, so now what I would like, directing your attention to where that piece of tissue was located within that room, it would be located somewhere in the vicinity of here. That is, and you can look at it. You can look at that diagram there. If you can indicate, perhaps you can make a red mark on the chart on the diagram as to where you would place that red mark or the red tissue. There's already a circle around it in red. I'm not talking about the photograph, I'm talking about up here, sir. Oh, perhaps if you can take a marker and make a mark here where it appears that that piece of tissue is located within the room. Somewhere in the in this neighborhood. All right, thank you. You may return to your seat. All right, now can you tell us, based upon the fact that there was some tissue there, where the shooter would have had to be relative to the victim in order for a piece of tissue to end up in that location? Well, you're making the assumption that this is a piece of tissue that was knocked out by one of the victims by a shot. Am I supposed to make that assumption? And we don't know which victim. It was never tested. So what is the point of this? Assuming that a hypothetical, can you tell us where the victim would be relative to the shooter in order for that to end up there? Well, I think it's, may I get up and indicate on the chart? Yes, sure. As I say, I think he was over here. I think, if he was somewhere in this general area at one point and one of the close range shots hits here, it could have been out there from, say, a shooter back here being something of this sort. So he would have had to be, I think he would, right in front of the table is probably a long distance for it, but if we got him over about where the two is, I think it's possible. If, in fact, we're talking about, you asked me, could it be from either victim? Okay, let me ask you this. What I'm asking is, would it have to be in a straight line? In other words, for that piece of tissue to end up there, would the victim and the shooter had to have been in a straight line so that it would be blown out in that location? Depending on the type of tissue, if it is blood-soaked bone, it's a solid tissue and could bounce some. If it is soft tissue, which could tend to hit and land, it would be a relatively straight line, but being a curved line going downward. Uh-huh. Okay. Now, a moment ago, doctor, you said it was your opinion that Jose Menendez was over here on the left side of the coffee table when he was shot. Is that correct? I said that was one of the possibilities. I didn't say that was where I thought he was. Right. You have no evidence that he was ever there by that side of the coffee table. That's correct. And you have no evidence that he was ever closer to that piece of tissue, such as you see in number two, as you suggested. Is that correct? That's correct. Let's get back to in the example given to you by counsel in the hypothetical, you agree that whether the sequence of shots Jose Menendez ended up in a seated position, is that correct? At the conclusion of the shooting? Yes. And can you tell us, in your opinion, how, if he was shot in the leg before the time that he sat down, he would have ended up with his legs crossed as indicated? Well, I think counsel demonstrated that by the rotation she showed right here in front of the jury. I think that's one plausible explanation for it. And in that scenario, did you understand that counsel was referring to a complete rotation of 180 degrees? Well, 180 degrees is a half rotation. I was thinking the same thing. I'm so glad he said it. A complete rotation is 360, I think you'll find. And did you contemplate in your agreement that with that hypothetical that he rotated 360 degrees or 180 degrees? He may well have gone 360 or lower, probably more than 180, maybe somewhere near the two. Well, let me direct your attention to the wound now to the left of the leg, to the left leg. Sorry, that's an error on their part. To the left leg of Jose Menendez. I'm sorry, let me direct your attention to the wound to the left elbow of Jose Menendez. You made a determination in regard to that wound that the shooter was 14 feet away at the time that the shot was fired, give or take 4. Is that correct? Yes, that's the approximation I gave you. And can you tell us what was the spread of the pellets that you assumed to be correct For purposes of that calculation, that is, the pellet defects on his arm. You're asking me for what now? That is, in order to reach a determination that the shot was fired from 14 feet away, you reached a conclusion. You made an observation first concerning a pellet defect in the left arm. Is that correct? Yes, yes. And your estimate that the shot was fired from 14 feet away was based upon the spread of those defects. Is that correct? Yes. And can you tell us what that spread was? Somewhat over 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches. Did you measure it? No, I'm estimated. Just visually? Well, yes. Did you feel it was necessary to take more accurate measurements than that? No. Considering the curvature of the elbow, did you take the curvature into consideration in coming up with that estimate? No. Why not? I didn't think it would really change it much. But you didn't make any measurements in that regard to test that hypothesis. I answered that I did not make any measurements, no. Did you examine the wound or the photograph of the wounds to determine how many of those how many of those defects could have been entrance and how many of them could have been exits? As I mentioned earlier, it's almost impossible to tell from a photograph which is which on a shotgun blast to an extremity. So, I did not. And you said that this morning you said that 2 of those pellet defects could have been caused by pellets which passed through the arm, passed through the elbow, causing 2 exits. Is that correct? Objection misstates the testimony. Rephrase the question. Was it your testimony this morning that of the 9 pellet defects that appeared on the left elbow of Jose Menendez, 2 of those pellet defects could have been caused by pellets which passed through the arm and the elbow and went on to cause 2 exits? Objection misstates the testimony. Overruled. I don't believe I said that. I said that I thought there's a possibility that they could have hit the bone at an angle and ricocheted off and caused an entrance/exit in the same area, not hitting and bouncing back off the same hole, but a ricochet type thing hitting at an angle is possible, causing a second hole as an exit hole. So it entered, causing 1 hole. It hits the bone, and then it ricochets out off the bone, causing an exit. Okay, so 2 of those defects, then, according to that hypothesis, could have been exit wounds. Is that correct? Yes, I think that's true. And 2 pellets could have passed on to strike another surface. Is that correct? That's true. And considering the fact that 2 of those pellet defects could have been exit wounds, did you once again reconsider the pellet spread of the wounds to the left elbow to see whether that changed your estimate of the pellet spread for the pellets entering the left elbow? No, I didn't. But I'd be happy to do it right now for you if you wish. We don't know which of these would be the exits. If we want to assume the most widespreads are exits, then I would have to revise my estimate in the distance downward. Uh-huh. So you have not done that so far. You have not recalculated that? No. I'd like to direct your attention to a small photograph I have at this time, 309, which shows the body of Jose Menendez lying on the plastic sheet. Do you see in that photograph what appears on his right side to be any small black marks that are about the size of pellet defects? It's difficult. Miss Abramson says, I'm going to object to the question as assumes facts not in evidence. And of course, the court overrules that. The witness says, are you referring to the ones that are marked circled in red? No, no. Just looking at the entire right side as she's laying on the sheet of plastic, do you see any marks there which are small, round, black marks consistent with the size of black pellets? Well, I see several that are small, round, darkish, and they appear to me to have the appearance of blood clots. There are a couple things on the sheet here that may be darker than the red, but it's very difficult to tell when you say dark. The dark red looks very similar to, a blood clot, for instance. It would be very difficult to tell from because blood clots are pretty dark. So there are lots of things that might meet the criterion for what you're speaking of. So you do see some small blood clots which are very dark, almost black, and appear to be about the size of pellet defects. Is that correct? That's correct, yeah. On the right arm, the dorsal forearm of Jose Menendez, do you see also what appears to be small black marks on his arm? Yes. Okay, now looking at those, can you tell us how many of those are blood clots and how many are pellet defects? No, I can't. Is it difficult to distinguish between blood clots and pellet defects? It can be. Now, was it your testimony this morning that if Jose and Kitty Menendez received any shared wounds, that it was most likely that they were standing at the time of the shared wounds? I thought possibly of random movement of both individuals when standing would present much more latitude for shared wounds than the fixed, relatively fixed positions of them seated side by side. Yes. And why would the possibility of them increase the likelihood of shared wounds over the likelihood that they were sitting together when a shared wound was received? Well, because of if you sit them in a static position, seated side by side, there are very limited possibilities. However, if they're standing, moving, both moving, then and being fired at, the possibilities are almost infinite. That's what I mean. But the actual wounds that were inflicted in this case were not an infinite number of wounds, but a certain number of wounds to each body. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative. Overruled. I didn't say the wounds were infinite, moron. Listen to my words. I said the number of possibilities for the locations of the wounds would be infinite. And do you associate any wounds on Kitty Menendez with wounds to Jose Menendez? I think there's some possibilities. There's no wound that I can say absolutely this is an associated wound. There are certain possibilities. Let me show you the exhibit that has been marked 323. Now, you agreed with a pellet count there of 33 on that exhibit, is that correct? That was a hypothetical, assuming that this was all lined up. And yes, I agreed to when you assume in a hypothetical form that a single projectile did all these and lined it up, this 33 certainly rules it out. So I didn't agree with that. I agreed to it being possible. When you agreed in this to what you agreed to in this diagram was that there were 33 pellet defects. Is that correct? Or 33 pellets involved? There were 33 pellets involved. If you line up all these four areas, yes. And that's why lining up all these four areas and sharing a single shot to do it is impossible. I repeat, that can't be because you can't get 33 pellets in a standard 12 gauge non-magnum load. Were you assuming that each of those figures, except 6, 16, and 4, all represented separate pellets or pellet holes? And is it possible that some of the pellets entered one part of the body and went to strike another part of the body? Certainly, it's possible. So he's trying to say, well, you said earlier that on his right arm, they ricocheted out and caused exit wounds. So maybe these defects on him are the same thing. And we've got all these 33 whatevers, but some of them might be ricocheted exit wounds, which he says is possible. All right, so if that happened, then the 33 would be wrong. Is that correct? I just said that, yes. Okay. If all these four given parts, yes. How, for the four pellet defects to the left forearm of Kitty Menendez, do you have information that those four pellet defects represented four separate pellets hitting the skin? Well, we have four holes, is what I said. Were any of those known to be or believed to be exits as opposed to entrances? I'm not sure if that was determined. I think they were all entrances, but not sure if anybody specifically determined that. Well, did you read the 1992, it's 95, supplement to Dr. Golden's report? Yes. And how many pellet wounds does he refer to in the left forearm of Kitty Menendez? You're speaking of the supplemental report to the amended autopsy report of August 23 of September 15th day of September 95. I'm referring to the 1992 amendment. Do you have a 2-page 1992 amendment? Just a second. The court says we're going to take a recess and resume at 1:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone and don't form any final opinions about it. Finally, we get to recess 2 hours later. But anyways, so I guess we're not done with Dr. Fackler. He is still going to be on the stand continuing his recross with the state because we're going to break and I can't read anymore for the day. I'm done. So but I'm glad I kind of went a little longer. So we had more Dr. Fackler. And then in the next episode, I believe we will finally complete his testimony and then move on to a bunch of arguments for, different witnesses coming up for the defense and reports and things that are happening, scheduling and talk like that. So that's where I am going to leave you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, share, do all the YouTube things, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.